The room went silent the second my son opened his mouth. Candles flickered. Laughter froze mid-breath. And my sister, smiling, polished, perfect, let her wine glass slip from her fingers and shatter at my feet. Because the joke he told wasn't a joke. It was the truth. A truth they'd buried under birthdays, fake hugs, and years of calling me too sensitive. I stood there, humiliated in front of everyone I'd ever tried to please, realizing they had been laughing at me, not with me, for far longer than this night. And as I looked around that table, I made myself a quiet promise: they would regret teaching my child that truth hurts. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? I need to know I'm not alone. The air smelled like sugar and secrets, too sweet, too perfect. Balloons swayed in a choreography that matched the artificial charm of my sister's voice as she welcomed each guest like royalty descending from a throne. Her smile, God, that smile, stretched across her face like a weapon dressed in lipstick. She'd spent weeks planning this birthday party, every detail sharpened to perfection: rose gold cutlery, personalized menu cards, hand-stitched napkins with her initials, as if the whole event were an altar built to worship her image. Even the playlist whispered curated nostalgia, songs from our childhood, respun to suit her narrative. But what gnawed at me wasn't the extravagance. It was the way she made sure everyone saw how effortlessly she pulled it off. That performative ease she wore like perfume, intoxicating, manufactured, and toxic. I stood by the edge of the deck, half holding a flute of champagne, watching my son play with his cousins. The way he glanced at me, quietly, almost protectively, unsettled me. Children shouldn't have to read adults like that. But he had seen things. Heard things. Things I'd swallowed so deeply I thought they were hidden. But kids know. They always know. Especially in families like mine. Families built on emotional manipulation, polished smiles, and brittle silence. I told myself I was only here to keep the peace. To show up. To not give them another excuse to say I was being dramatic. That word, dramatic, had become their shield, their passcode to invalidate every bruise they couldn't see. My sister's voice rose again, this time calling everyone to the table. Her birthday toast was dripping with rehearsed modesty, fake gratitude, and strategically inserted jabs cloaked as jokes. I mean, we all remember how Mom used to say some of us were born to lead, and others, well, to follow. Laughter rippled around the table. I felt it crawl over my skin like fire ants. I smiled. Because that's what I was trained to do, smile through betrayal, wear humiliation like a second skin. Aunts, uncles, cousins nodded with that same mechanical agreement they'd perfected over decades. No one questioned her. They never did. Every time she looked at me, there was a flicker. A moment too long. A smirk that curled like a secret kept just out of reach. She was feeding on the unspoken history between us, savoring it like dessert. The time she locked me out of the house during a storm and told Mom I'd run away. The time she stole the scholarship fund Dad left for me and used it for her wedding, claiming I had no direction anyway. The time she laughed when I cried after Mom forgot my birthday. My tears were punchlines. My pain was their bonding ritual. But today, something shifted. It wasn't just me anymore. My son watched it unfold. Watched her glance at me with performative kindness, then roll her eyes the moment I looked away. Watched his grandmother laugh when I spilled wine on my dress and called it a classic mess-up moment. He caught the flash of sadness in my eyes. And that's when I felt it, not anger, not hurt. Something colder. A stillness. Like a fuse quietly burning. Like a revenge plan waiting for oxygen. She opened her birthday gift from me, handwritten letters from our mother's journals, ones she thought were lost. Her smile trembled for half a second. Just half. Enough to tell me she knew what I had, what I could expose. A page in that journal detailed the inheritance division Mom had promised me in private, one she never told the others. A promise overwritten when my sister suddenly became executor after Mom's unexpected illness. It was just a flicker, but it was real. Her smile faltered. She looked at me like I had just crawled out of the shadows with something dangerous in my hands. And I had. I excused myself from the table, claiming I needed to check on the kids. But I wasn't running. I was studying. Observing. My son caught up to me near the swing set, his little brow furrowed. "Why do they laugh like that?" he asked. No fear in his voice. Just confusion. Innocence rubbing up against manipulation. "Because they don't know how to listen," I whispered, crouching beside him. "And what you said earlier? About what you heard Grandma say, can you tell me again?" He nodded solemnly. "She said Aunt Lily made you give up your house. That you were too weak to keep it." I swallowed something sharp. That house was mine. Left by Dad. But Lily convinced the family it was better she keep it in the bloodline, and I had caved. I'd been outvoted. Shamed. Told I was unstable and ungrateful. And somehow, they made me believe it. That betrayal, financial manipulation disguised as family concern, was the kind of trauma that never left your bones. But my son remembered. He heard. He carried it for me. I looked back toward the table. My sister was laughing again, but her eyes kept darting toward the journal pages, then to her phone. She was calculating. Assessing. She knew I wouldn't have brought those letters without purpose. She just didn't know when the rest would surface. And I wanted her to wonder. I wanted her to spiral. That was the beginning of my revenge plan, make her feel the dread I'd swallowed for years. As the sun dipped behind the hedges, casting long shadows over the garden, I felt something shift in the air. My son slipped his hand into mine. And across the lawn, my sister stared too long, her smile back in place, but her eyes giving her away. That was the first crack. The smile that betrayed the foundation she thought was unshakable. Tomorrow, she'll call. I know she will. To ask what else I found in Mom's journals. To pretend she's just curious. But tonight, I'll let her stew. Let her sit in that sparkling garden of her own making, surrounded by guests who don't know that the Queen of the Hour built her castle on theft, lies, and a sister's silence. And I won't be silent anymore. Just as the first candle was lit on her birthday cake, my phone vibrated in my pocket, once, twice. A name flashed across the screen. Unknown number. No message. No caller ID. But I knew. She wasn't the only one hiding something. It's strange how laughter can sound like glass shattering when it's aimed at you. Not just loud, but cruel. Warped. At that dinner table, my sister's birthday cake barely touched the linen when it started, the joke that wasn't one. A neatly packaged humiliation, dropped into conversation like a candy-coated grenade. Remember when she tried to start that catering thing? What was it? Soulful Bites, someone said, grinning. It bit the dust faster than her engagement did. Laughter erupted. Real, belly-deep laughter. And I sat there, smiling with my lips and bleeding through my teeth. It wasn't just the words. It was the timing. The calculation. How they waited until I was mid-sip of wine, how they made sure I couldn't speak without choking. That joke has lived inside them for years. They passed it around like a family heirloom, each of them polishing it with a new punchline. My failed business. My failed relationship. My supposed oversensitivity. A favorite dish served cold, at every family gathering. And the more they told it, the less it sounded like cruelty. It was just tradition. Just banter. Just me, being too emotional again if I didn't laugh along. But I wasn't laughing. Humor was always their weapon of choice. Not outright insults, never that. Just enough sarcasm laced into the delivery to make it deniable. To make it my fault for taking it the wrong way. Emotional abuse painted with pastel brushstrokes, hidden beneath homemade pies and forced group photos. My mother was the master of it. She once told me with a giggle that I was the kind of pretty that doesn't age well. Said it right before my high school graduation. My father, silent as ever, just rubbed his temples and said, "Don't be so sensitive, sweetheart." The message was clear, she didn't mean it like that. But she did. They always do. That night, seated across from my sister's perfect tiered cake, I traced their rhythm like a symphony of social sabotage. Uncle Doug launched the first line. Aunt Marion picked it up, adding her own "remember when." Laughter followed, like applause. My sister watched me the whole time, not with amusement, but with anticipation. She was waiting to see if I'd crack. Waiting for me to either cry or clap back, either of which would validate their picture of me: unstable, overreactive, difficult. I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I looked at the faces around me. Some laughed too hard. Some forced their smiles. But others were silent. Cousin Jenna, sitting stiffly, fork unmoving. My brother-in-law, staring too long at the tablecloth. There were fractures in the performance. Tiny ones. And in those fractures I caught glimpses of secrets. Regret. Maybe fear. I catalogued them all like evidence at a crime scene. I wasn't sure what they knew, but I knew now, without doubt, they all knew something. And then, my son, sweet, quiet, observant, asked his question. It came at the worst possible moment. The room had just finished laughing at a story my mother told about the time I got dumped at prom. I could still hear her voice, falsely nostalgic. She came home crying in that purple dress, mascara everywhere. We thought she'd never leave her room again. We had to bribe her with ice cream, remember? More laughter. My sister leaned in. And now she says she's working on self-love. Isn't that adorable? That was when he spoke. Is that when Grandma said you'd always be alone? The silence was biblical. Every utensil stopped. A single spoon dropped against a dessert plate. My sister's eyes widened. My mother's smile cracked like a plate under pressure. Even the background music seemed to pause, as if the playlist itself understood what had just been said. I turned slowly to face him. "What did you say, sweetheart?" He looked up, confused but calm. "I heard Grandma on the phone. She said you'd always be alone because you're too needy? And that you don't make good decisions." His eyes searched mine, unsure if he'd done something wrong. Was that a joke too? And just like that, the air turned thick. Every smile at the table froze mid-expression. Because this wasn't me crying, wasn't me accusing or remembering. This was a child. My child. Quoting them. Echoing the secrets they thought were safe behind closed doors. The betrayal I'd felt all my life, the family drama, the toxic parents, the years of emotional abuse I'd minimized and internalized, was now suddenly real to everyone. Because it had passed through the mouth of an innocent. Stripped of performance. Free from tone. A truth bomb, dropped with no warning and no malice. Just memory. I watched my mother shrink into herself, her spine tightening as she muttered something about misunderstood context. My sister coughed, offered a weak laugh, and said, "Kids say the wildest things." But I wasn't looking at them anymore. I was looking at the people who had always stood by quietly. My aunt, who once pulled me aside to ask if I was okay living alone all these years. My cousin, who'd once sent me a text apologizing for not stepping in. All of them frozen now, exposed. They'd known. Maybe not everything. But enough. I touched my son's shoulder gently. "Where did you hear that?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. He looked over at the patio where my mother often took her phone calls when she thought no one was listening. "A few weeks ago. When you were in the kitchen. Grandma was talking to someone. I was on the steps. I stood, slowly. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just tall. My chair scraped the floor and echoed like a gavel in a courtroom. Every eye followed me. And suddenly, I could feel it, the shift. The control slipping from their fingers. Because I wasn't reacting out of pain. I wasn't breaking. I was becoming something else entirely, still. Cold. Focused. I excused myself again, using my son as the reason. He's tired, I said, even though he wasn't. We're going to head out. My sister stood up as if to protest, but I met her gaze, and she sat back down without saying a word. She knew. As I gathered my things, I heard someone whisper, low, urgent. I couldn't tell who. She heard. She knows. Good. Let them whisper. Let them panic. In the car, my son sat quiet, picking at the hem of his sleeve. I looked at him in the rearview mirror, heart heavy with the realization that my silence had been a lesson I never meant to teach. He had learned that his mother's hurt was funny to people. That her dreams were punchlines. That her pain was permissible. That it was okay to dismiss her with a joke. But not anymore. They had turned humor into humiliation for so long, they forgot that truth has perfect memory. Especially when whispered within earshot of a child. And now that truth was awake. As I pulled into my driveway, my phone vibrated again. Unknown number. One message. He wasn't supposed to hear that. We need to talk. I didn't respond. I just stared at the screen until it went dark. Who said it, and why did they think he wouldn't understand? The house was too quiet for a Saturday morning. Not peaceful, just silent in that uneasy, echoing way that makes every sound sharper. The ticking of the kitchen clock. The hum of the fridge. The whisper of my son's socks on the hallway floor as he padded in, clutching his favorite blanket. He didn't say anything at first. Just climbed onto the couch beside me and leaned his head on my shoulder like he used to when he was smaller. Before he started asking questions I didn't know how to answer. I hadn't slept. Not really. I kept replaying his words from the night before, the way he said them so innocently, like he was reporting the weather. Was that a joke too? That question kept chewing its way through my chest. My whole life, I'd believed I was shielding him. Keeping the ugliness wrapped in silence so it wouldn't spill onto him. But silence is never empty. It's a shape, a presence, a shadow that teaches even when you think it's hiding. Are you mad at me? He asked softly, his voice still thick with sleep. The way he said it made me want to scream. Not at him, never at him. At myself. At the years I spent letting that family define me. At the way I'd bent myself into knots to be the forgiving one, the understanding one, the bigger person. And in doing so, I'd become the smaller one. The invisible one. And he had noticed. No, sweetheart, I whispered, kissing the top of his head. I'm not mad at you. You did nothing wrong. He was quiet again for a moment, then said, but I told them what Grandma said. And everyone got weird. I didn't respond right away. Because what do you say to a child who accidentally blew the lid off of a lifetime of manipulation? Who saw the performance crack and doesn't yet understand what it means to be punished for speaking truth in a family that survives on lies? Instead, I asked him, do you remember anything else from that day? When you heard her talking? He nodded. She said Aunt Lily should keep the house because you wouldn't know what to do with it anyway. His voice was light, matter of fact, but it pierced something deep in me. That house, my father's house, was supposed to be mine. He'd told me himself, years before he died, in one of the few moments he wasn't pretending everything was fine. I'd believed him. Until the will was read and suddenly things had changed. Clauses added. Assets reassigned. And I had been too stunned, too worn down, to question it. Too well trained to stay quiet. They said I wasn't ready, I murmured, more to myself than to him. Are you ready now? He asked, and I felt my breath catch. I turned to look at him. His eyes were wide and trusting, but behind them was something else. Something older. Children from toxic families grow up fast. They have to learn the cues adults don't admit they're giving. He had seen my humiliation dressed as laughter. He had heard my tears filtered through jokes. He had watched me shrink, time and time again, and taken notes. And now he was waiting to see if I'd finally stand up. "I'm more than ready," I said, and I meant it. That's when he said it. So casually I almost missed it. "Did you see the papers in Aunt Lily's office drawer? The ones with Grandma's name and all those numbers?" My pulse thudded in my ears. "What papers?" "I don't know. It had your name on one of them. I saw it when I was playing hide and seek with Ethan. I was hiding in her office. She came in and didn't see me. She opened the drawer and took pictures of some papers with her phone." I sat up straighter. "You're sure it had my name?" "Yeah. It said beneficiary amendment and something about signature on file." I didn't understand it. But she looked nervous. She kept checking the hallway. I froze. Beneficiary amendment. That was a legal term. One I hadn't heard in years, not since my father's estate was settled. And signature on file, was it mine? Was it forged? Was it part of the reason everything I'd been promised evaporated? For the first time in years, I felt that spark again, not just anger. Strategy. My son had seen what he wasn't meant to. Heard what they thought they'd buried under layers of plausible deniability. The joke about my business. The comments about me being alone. The dismissal of my grief, my boundaries, my needs. It wasn't just about the emotional abuse anymore. This wasn't just toxic family dynamics. This was theft. This was financial manipulation. And it had a paper trail. I hugged him tight, almost too tight. "Thank you for telling me." He hugged me back, then pulled away to ask the question I'd been dreading. "Why do they say those things about you? Why does Grandma say you're not good enough?" The words slammed into me like a punch. Because I didn't have a clean answer. There was no logic to generational trauma. No tidy explanation for why some mothers weaponize shame instead of offering love. I could only speak what I knew. "Some people need to believe others are weak to feel strong," I said slowly. "And when they see someone try to get back up, they laugh, so no one else helps her stand." "But you stood up anyway," he said. And I nodded, tears burning behind my eyes. "I'm trying. And I won't let them hurt you like they hurt me." That was the moment it shifted for real. Not just in theory. Not just quiet anger or internal resistance. This was the beginning of the revenge arc. Not revenge in the petty sense. Revenge in the reclamation sense. Reclaiming truth. Power. Dignity. I was done being the emotional sponge for their dysfunction. Done letting their laughter define my worth. I would find those papers. I would dig up every email, every discrepancy, every false narrative. If they forged my name, they'd face consequences. If they stole what was mine, they'd pay it back, publicly. Later that night, after my son went to sleep, I opened my laptop and began searching through old emails, bank records, estate documents. I combed through every shred of correspondence from the months after my father's death. I found nothing, yet. But I knew where the rest was hidden. Her office. Her drawer. Her phone. And now I had a reason to go back. I stared at my reflection in the dark screen, the face that had once begged for love now staring back with something sharper. Something colder. They thought my silence was permission. But all this time, it was preparation. A ping broke the silence. Another message. "You need to stop before someone gets hurt." No number. No name. Just the words. Just the threat. But I wasn't afraid. I just needed to know one thing now. What exactly did my son see, and how deep did the lies go? I didn't sleep that night either. But this time, it wasn't fear that kept me awake. It was calculation. Cold, focused, methodical. I've learned that silence can be sharpened into something deadly when you stop using it as a shield and start using it as a tool. The house was quiet again, my son's breathing steady in the next room, unaware that the moment he opened his mouth at that birthday table, he'd lit a fuse no one saw coming. I sat hunched over my laptop, drowning in browser tabs. Legal forums, probate law sites, archived bank emails, digital folders I hadn't opened in years. They'd told me I had no head for money, no sense for detail, that I was too emotional to manage something as important as an estate. I believed them once. But now, every document I opened was a brick pulled from the foundation of their carefully constructed lies. And brick by brick, the house they built started to tilt. I found the first inconsistency in an old PDF labeled Final Distribution Summary. It was supposed to reflect the equal division of our father's assets. Supposed to. But something snagged my attention. My share had a notation, deferred transfer, pending review. There was no follow-up document. No explanation. Just that single phrase, quiet and suspicious, like a breath caught in the middle of a lie. I searched for the bank that managed the estate account. No recent logins, because I hadn't touched it since the settlement. But I remembered the attorney. I still had his number. I debated calling, but not yet. Not without something solid. Something they couldn't twist into another misunderstanding. So I kept digging. By mid-morning, my eyes were dry, my coffee cold, but I found it, an email from the executor's office dated 6 months after the will was executed. It wasn't addressed to me. It was forwarded to my sister from a legal admin subject line, amendment authorization follow-up. In the body, there was a request for my signature confirmation on the new distribution plan. But here's the catch, the signature file attached wasn't mine. It looked like mine. But I'd never signed a post-distribution form. Never authorized any amendments. And tucked in the metadata, God bless digital incompetence, was a document origin path from a PDF editing program. Not a scanned signature. A copy-paste job. Someone had taken an old form I did sign and used it to validate a completely different transaction. That was the moment my hand stopped shaking. Because it wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was fraud. And they had left receipts. I copied everything. Saved the emails, pulled metadata, cross-referenced file creation times. I compiled it into a folder titled For Legal Review and stashed it on a cloud account they didn't know existed. Every click felt like a quiet revolution. Not dramatic. Not messy. Just inevitable. Then I remembered what my son said about Aunt Lily photographing documents in her office. I knew her alarm code. She hadn't changed it in years. Why would she? In her world, she was untouchable. Clever, yes. But not careful. Narcissists rarely are. Their arrogance convinces them their victims will stay broken. That we'll never collect ourselves long enough to fight back. I waited until Monday. Pretended to call, pretended to clear the air. Told her I wanted to come by, just the two of us. Her voice was sugar and condescension, every syllable laced with smug pity. She thought I was crawling back, as usual. That I wanted to apologize for making things awkward at her party. I let her think it. When I arrived, she poured wine like we were still kids playing grown-up. Asked how my son was doing with his little outburst. I smiled and sipped, forcing warmth into my voice. Kids pick up everything these days, I said, watching her flinch just slightly. Her phone buzzed once. She flipped it over, face down. I excused myself to the bathroom and made a quiet detour through the hallway. Her office door was cracked. Inside, the drawer she always kept locked wasn't even latched. Overconfidence. Or carelessness. Either way, it was open now. I didn't take anything, I wasn't stupid. I just snapped photos. Folders labeled Family Trust, Disbursement Overrides, and one thin manila envelope labeled in her handwriting, Alt Copy, Hard Sign. Inside it, 2 notarized pages with my name misspelled in one place, corrected in pen. The notary stamp looked real. But the signature beneath it, mine, wasn't. It was clean. Too clean. Not rushed, not slanted like my real handwriting under pressure. I stared at it for a full minute before the weight of it registered. She had forged my name and notarized the lie. When I returned to the living room, she was scrolling through her phone. She looked up with a smile too tight, too rehearsed. "Everything okay?" "Perfect," I said. "Thanks for the wine." She raised her glass. "To healing," she said. And I toasted her. "To truth," I replied. That night, I called a friend. A quiet one. Someone I'd helped once, long ago, who now worked in a law office that specialized in estate fraud. I sent him the files. All of them. He responded in minutes. "You may have a criminal case. And if the notary isn't legitimate, we're looking at a serious offense." I stared at his words like they were written in another language. Not because I didn't understand them, but because I did. All those years they told me I was too soft, too scattered, too emotional to handle anything serious, and here I was, holding the very thing that could dismantle their empire. This wasn't just emotional abuse anymore. This wasn't just family betrayal. This was calculated. Profitable. Intentional. They didn't just exclude me from love. They excluded me from legacy. My inheritance had been siphoned off to pay for Lily's kitchen remodel, her vacations, her precious image of perfection. My silence wasn't just convenient for them, it was lucrative. And now I was done being their liability. I was becoming their reckoning. I stared at the screen again, at the neatly organized folder labeled "For Legal Review." And I whispered it aloud to no one. "This ends with me." Then I opened my encrypted notes app, added a new entry titled Step 2, and typed one question in bold at the top of the page. How far does the paper trail go? They say revenge is best served cold. But I found it's best served smiling, with a glass of wine in hand and my enemies still convinced they'd won. I returned to them like nothing had changed, like my son hadn't cracked open the rot beneath their perfect performances, like I hadn't found the forged signatures, the stolen inheritance, the stack of receipts they thought would stay buried. I slipped back into their world with the same polished silence they'd always mistaken for submission. Because the most dangerous version of me was the one they never saw coming. Sunday brunch at my mother's was my first performance. Her home smelled like overcooked eggs and rose-scented denial. My sister, radiant in a new silk blouse she likely bought with my money, greeted me with a kiss on the cheek that lingered just a beat too long. "I'm glad we're moving past things," she said sweetly, her tone dipped in honey and arsenic. "It's better for the family." "For the family," I echoed, smiling as I tucked my hand gently around my son's shoulder, steadying us both. They believed I was folding. Again. That my quietness meant I'd processed and forgiven. What they didn't see was the fire behind my eyes, the way I was mentally cataloging every comment, every smirk, every exchange. I was building a dossier, not just of what they did, but who they truly were when they thought no one was watching. I stayed late that day, offering to help clean up. I made idle chatter while my mother complained about how some people just don't have the family gene. I let her dig her own grave with every passive-aggressive comment, every complaint about how exhausting it was to carry everyone else's drama. Then she said it, "Your sisters really had to hold the family together, especially with all you've been through." I tilted my head. "You mean with the house?" Her eyes flickered. "You let that go, didn't you?" "It was years ago." "I did," I said, matching her tone. "I just hope the paperwork was all in order." She stiffened, just slightly. That was all I needed. A microreaction. A ripple in her composure. It confirmed more than she realized. Over the next few weeks, I played the long game. Family dinner here, a cousin's baby shower there. Each time I showed up, calm and gracious, the more emboldened they became. The jokes came back, lighter at first, cautious, then sharper as they convinced themselves I was back in my rightful place beneath them. Lily started sending check-in texts again, filled with faux concern. "Just making sure you're okay," she'd write. "You've always been so sensitive." I responded with warmth. "Thank you for thinking of me." I'm working on being stronger. That was the truth, just not the one she assumed. Every dinner, I collected details. Who was talking to whom? Who flinched at certain topics? I watched their patterns, how Lily always deflected when finances were mentioned, how my mother's smile grew brittle any time I spoke about legal things in passing. I casually mentioned meeting an attorney for some estate clarification, and watched Lily spill her wine. I wasn't just planning revenge. I was scripting it. I kept my son out of it, mostly. Shielded him from the intensity. But I did begin to teach him subtle things, how to read tone, how to recognize performance. Not out of bitterness, but preparation. Because children of narcissistic families don't get to stay children for long. At least this time, I could make sure he had armor I never did. One night, while scrolling through my saved documents, I realized how much I had gathered. Emails, account changes, forged documents, timestamp discrepancies. I'd built a case so tight even the best PR spin wouldn't unravel it. And still, I waited. Because evidence is power, but timing is control. The opportunity came wrapped in forced sentiment. My mother texted me one evening, "We're thinking of having a little family meeting. Clear the air, no tension going into the holidays." Lily suggested it. Just us girls. Us girls. Like this was still high school and the biggest betrayal was a stolen lipstick. I read the message 3 times, every word pulsing with condescension. They believed they were summoning me to apologize, likely expecting tears, a fragile confession, a grovel. But I wasn't coming to beg. I was coming to bury. I replied, "That sounds like a great idea. I've actually been wanting to talk about some things too." No exclamation points. No emojis. Just calm. They wouldn't know what hit them. The next few days passed with eerie quiet. A few family group chat messages, photos of grandchildren, a forwarded joke from an uncle. Normalcy painted over decay. I continued to act unbothered. Went to work. Packed lunches. Kept my voice even. But inside, I was sharpening every word I planned to say, printing every document twice, highlighting every clause. Revenge isn't rage. Rage is loud, messy, uncontrollable. Revenge is patient. Surgical. You don't scream while holding the scalpel, you breathe slowly and cut where it bleeds the most. I called Jenna, my cousin, under the pretense of catching up. Halfway through our chat, I mentioned the meeting. "I think it'll be good to talk openly," I said, watching for her reaction. She paused, then said, "You're not planning to stir anything up, right?" I smiled. "Not at all. Just clarity." Jenna hesitated. "Just, be careful. Lily's been saying things. Making it seem like you're unstable." There it was. The setup. The preemptive smear. If I spoke up, I'd be dismissed as irrational. Emotional. Difficult. But this time, I had proof. And no amount of performative concern could erase what was typed in black and white. The night before the meeting, I didn't sleep again. But I wasn't restless. I was ready. I laid everything out, documents, copies, a printed timeline, even screenshots of text messages that contradicted their narratives. I rehearsed the questions I'd ask. Not accusations. Questions. Because questions require answers. And lies fracture under inquiry. They think this is about forgiveness. It's not. It's about accountability. And tomorrow, they'll find out exactly what I've been building behind this calm face. The dining room smelled of lemon polish and tension. My mother had lit one of those overpriced candles she saves for special occasions, as if a flickering flame could mask the rot festering beneath the surface. The table was set too perfectly, folded napkins like pressed apologies, wine glasses catching the chandelier light like interrogation mirrors. My sister sat at the head of the table, like always, legs crossed, phone face down but within reach. My mother hovered, pouring water like she was baptizing us before battle. I smiled politely. I had brought no armor, just truth, printed and ready. Shall we start? Lily asked, voice sugar-coated and smug, pretending this was her idea. Her confidence was an unearned inheritance. She thought she still owned the room. That was her first mistake. I folded my hands. Of course, I said. Thank you both for making time. I've actually been looking forward to this. My mother narrowed her eyes slightly, sensing something in my tone. She sat down beside Lily, placing herself symbolically on that side of the table. Old loyalties die hard. My father's absence hung in the room like an accusation. He would have never allowed this if he were alive. But he wasn't. And they used that silence to rewrite everything. Lily cleared her throat. I think we all agree it's time to move past the awkwardness. What happened at my birthday was uncomfortable. But I know we all have love at the core, even when things get messy. Messy? I repeated. That's one word for forgery. Her face stilled. That was the first clean hit. No yelling. Just a scalpel slid beneath her skin. What are you talking about? She asked too quickly. I pulled the first document from my folder and laid it gently on the table. The amendment to Dad's distribution plan. The one you submitted 6 months after the will was finalized. With my forged signature. My mother gasped, her hand reaching for her pearls like some parody of guilt. Lily, to her credit, didn't flinch. She leaned forward, studied the paper like it might erase itself if she stared hard enough. This looks like your signature. It does, I agreed. Which is why metadata is such a beautiful thing. The file was edited. Not scanned. There's no ink trail. And the notary on this document? She retired 3 years before the document was dated. She's not even in the state. Lily blinked once. Twice. My mother said, there must be some mistake. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation, I said. It's a statement of fact. And it's already been reviewed by legal counsel. They're looking into criminal charges. Lily scoffed, but the color had drained from her face. You're being dramatic. There it was. The fallback insult. The gaslight. The lifelong invalidation repackaged one more time. I leaned in, voice still calm. You stole from me. You manipulated the estate process, siphoned funds, and used forged documents to redirect a portion of my inheritance into your personal accounts. I have the bank statements. Another sheet slid across the table. I heard my mother suck in her breath. Her loyalty to Lily had always been feral, but this made her shift. Her eyes scanned the numbers. Large transfers. Internal account movements. Labeled family disbursement adjustments. Why would you do that? My mother whispered to Lily. And there it was, the crack. The first fracture. Lily shrugged, but the smugness was slipping. It was just easier. You said yourself she wasn't ready. I was handling everything. The taxes, the probate filings, the logistics. I didn't say to forge anything, my mother snapped. They had started to splinter, right there in front of me. I almost felt pity. Almost. She said you agreed to it, I said softly, pinning my mother with a look. Did you? I trusted her. I didn't know, her voice trailed off. I didn't believe her. But I didn't need to prove her complicity. Just her fear. I turned the next page. This is the original beneficiary breakdown. Dated before the edits. It names me as co-owner of the property. Equal rights. That clause is gone in the amended version. Lily's face twisted. You haven't been able to take care of yourself for years. You think Dad would have wanted you to manage a property? And there it was, the contempt. The real truth. The belief that I was lesser. That my pain made me undeserving. My voice didn't waver. My therapist would disagree. So would my son. But it doesn't matter what you think. It matters what was legal. And what wasn't. I laid out another document, an email, casual, almost careless. Sent from Lily to the estate lawyer, asking whether family understanding could override formal paperwork. She never received a reply. But the attempt was there. My mother now sat silently, lips tight. I could see the war waging behind her eyes, protect her golden child, or protect herself. She chose the latter. "You're going to ruin this family," she muttered. I laughed. Quiet and sharp. "You ruined it years ago. I'm just pulling back the curtain." Lily stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood. "This is insane. You're not well." I tilted my head. "That's what you always say, isn't it? When I get too close to the truth. When I stop playing along." I stood too, slow and steady, gathering the papers. "I've already begun legal proceedings. But I wanted to give you both this moment. A chance to see what it looks like when your lies finally stop working. You're blowing everything out of proportion." "No," I said, slipping the final document back into the folder. "That's the one thing I'm not doing anymore." The room was quiet again. No candles could soften the air now. It reeked of fear and exposed rot. As I walked toward the door, my mother called after me, voice cracking, "What else do you have?" I paused, then turned back. "One final document," I said. "One I haven't shared yet. The one Dad gave me before he died. The handwritten addendum to the will." Her face went white. Lily's voice was barely a whisper. "That's not valid." "Maybe. Maybe not. But when paired with a forged one, it becomes very, very interesting to a judge." I left them sitting there, Lily standing, trembling, my mother frozen in her seat. They had thought they called this meeting for closure. But I had come for exposure. And now they knew. There's one more document. And they have no idea what it says. It began with silence, not screaming. No dramatic outbursts, no overturned chairs or teary confessions. Just the slow, stunned quiet that follows the detonation of something too carefully buried for too long. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. My mother sat in her usual place at the head of the Sunday dinner table, napkin folded too neatly on her lap, fork untouched. My sister across from her, the weight of everything finally visible in the slump of her shoulders, the twitch of her mascara-smudged eye. The others, cousins, aunts, the ones who'd always smiled politely while stepping over me, now avoided eye contact like it might burn. No one touched the roast she'd spent all day cooking. No one said grace. And I didn't have to say anything at all. The documents were already in motion. The attorney had filed the formal fraud complaint 2 days prior. The estate's financial audit was reopened. And a forensic specialist had confirmed what I already knew, that the signature on the amendment wasn't just digitally manipulated, but mirrored identically from a prior form. Evidence, irrefutable and cold. Their lies were catalogued now. Not whispered behind closed doors or swept under rugs. Documented. Legal. Real. I sat at the far end of the table this time. Not at the margin, not perched like a guest in my own family. I chose my seat. Took it with the quiet authority of someone who no longer needed approval. They noticed. Of course they did. Lily hadn't spoken since I walked in. She didn't need to. Her silence was the most honest thing she'd ever offered. The bruised ego, the unraveling image, the terrifying realization that her perfect life had been built on a scaffolding of theft, performance, and fraud, and now that scaffolding was gone. She couldn't spin this. There was no version of events that made her the victim. She looked smaller now. Not physically. Spiritually. Deflated. Like her self-worth had been tangled so tightly around the inheritance, the power, the control, that without it, she didn't know what she was. My mother attempted civility, because that was always her armor. She tried to serve bread, as if carbohydrates could fix criminal charges. I think we should focus on healing now, she said softly. No one responded. Aunt Marion cleared her throat. Is it true? She asked, looking directly at Lily. The documents? Lily blinked. Once. Twice. Then nodded. Her lips barely moved. I didn't mean for it to go that far. That was her line. That was her confession. Not I'm sorry. Not I lied. Just the vague suggestion that somehow, the fraud had grown legs of its own and walked into a courtroom. The blame spread like spilled wine. You involved me, my mother snapped suddenly, her voice cracking. You said it was under control. Lily turned to her. You told me to handle it. You said she didn't need the stress. You signed off on everything. I didn't forge anything. You knew. And there it was, fracture made manifest. They turned on each other so easily it almost felt rehearsed. Like they'd been waiting for permission to drop their masks. All those years of loyalty, of carefully orchestrated emotional abuse, shattered in minutes once the foundation was threatened. It was never about love. It was about control. And control only exists when everyone plays their role. Now the roles were gone. And no one knew their lines. I didn't interrupt. Didn't raise my voice or deliver some grand monologue about justice. I just watched. Observed. Not out of cruelty, but clarity. I needed to see them as they truly were, not powerful, not untouchable. Just deeply afraid. And for the first time I wasn't. Jenna whispered to me as the arguing escalated. How long have you known? Long enough, I said. Long enough to stop explaining myself. She nodded, shame flickering behind her eyes. She was one of the silent ones. Not cruel, just complicit. Complicit in every Sunday dinner where I was the punchline. Complicit in every eye roll, every year being sensitive, every time she laughed too loud when I winced. I should have said something sooner, she murmured. You still can, I replied. She didn't answer. Eventually, the shouting slowed. My mother retreated into silence, sipping wine like it could undo her alignment with Lily. My sister simply stared at the table, jaw tight, hands trembling slightly. She wasn't used to losing. Her entire identity was built around being the one who had it all together, the career, the house, the approval, the stories that always ended with my failures and her victories. But she had underestimated the quiet ones. Underestimated the daughter who stayed calm. The sister who stopped reacting. The woman who didn't scream, but documented. Who didn't collapse, but rebuilt. And my son, he sat beside me the entire time, silent but alert, his small hand occasionally brushing mine under the table. He understood more than he should have. Too much, maybe. But he saw what it meant to reclaim yourself without becoming what hurt you. He watched his mother win without ever needing to humiliate back. I think, in some ways, that moment taught him more than any lecture ever could. When dessert was finally served, uneaten apple pie and melting ice cream, I stood. My cue wasn't words, but movement. My presence was the final statement. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need applause. I'd already won. As I gathered my things, my mother asked quietly, so, what happens now? I turned to her. That depends, I said. On how much more truth you're ready for. Then I looked at Lily. Because there's still one thing I haven't shared yet. She flinched. Jenna looked between us. What do you mean? I smiled, not kindly, not cruelly. Just truthfully. There's one more document. One none of you have seen. Something Dad gave me before he died. Something handwritten. Something legal. Lily's face turned a shade paler. You're bluffing. I didn't answer. I just placed my hand over my son's and squeezed gently. He looked up at me, curious. Is it over now? And I looked back at the broken family behind me, the hushed rage, the shame, the fear, the unraveling alliances. I didn't answer him either. Because I wasn't sure. I had won. But what does victory actually cost? The storm didn't end in screams. It ended in stillness. Lawyers took over where words had failed. My sister faced legal scrutiny, her image cracking under the weight of paper trails and certified truths. My mother retreated into a cold, echoing quiet, the kind born not from guilt, but from exposure. The family, once so practiced in unspoken alliances and polite betrayal, fell into disrepair. No more holidays. No more calls. Just space. Beautiful, intentional space. I didn't demand apologies. I didn't wait for them to admit what they'd done. I walked away holding something far more valuable than their validation, my own clarity. My son watched me rise, not in anger, but in power. He learned that strength isn't always loud. It's strategy. It's restraint. It's knowing exactly when to speak, and when to let the truth speak for you. The silence I once used to survive became the silence I used to win. To anyone who's ever been laughed at, dismissed, or silenced by their own blood, ask yourself, who does your silence protect? And who does it set free? They thought my silence meant weakness, but silence was where I learned how to win.